Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson, and a very warm welcome to our guest today, Sarah Perugia, who is joining us and to talk about all things around leadership, women, and also the whole person leadership, which I'm very excited to talk about in more detail. But welcome to the show, first of all, Sarah.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm very excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, before we get going, it'd be really great for you to introduce yourself more fully and tell our listeners more about the work that you do.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm an executive leadership master coach. I'm, as you said, a whole person leadership transformation specialist, a keynote speaker, also, like yourself, a podcast host, and probably the two main things that my clients know me for and that I'm particularly passionate about is the first is women in leadership. So I've spent the last 20 years really following my passion for supporting women in leadership and helping organizations build those female talent pipelines, helping organizations really nurture that female talent so that they can build those gender equal senior teams, which we know make such a difference to culture and behaviors and inclusion, all those wonderful things that we know also boost performance. Probably my other hat, which is very much connected, but probably worth talking about, is that before I became a positive psychology coach, a whole person coach, a strengths coach, I was a professional actor. So, like yourself, Victoria, I'm really passionate about how we communicate with each other. So, not only the language that we use, but also everything that goes on physiologically and physically that helps or hinders our ability to engage, inspire, connect with others. And of course, that's such an important part of being an impactful, inspirational leader.
Wow, there is so much for us to talk about here today. I'm
I
so excited for this
know.
conversation. And so let me start with this idea of whole person
Mm,
leadership, because I find
mm,
that really fascinating. So can you just tell us a little bit more by what you mean by that and what does that look like in
mm.
today's workplace?
Oh, thank you. Yes, this is a topic I'm really passionate about. So, in my 20 years of helping leaders perform and excel and flourish and fulfill their potential, what I started to notice probably quite a few years ago now is that actually the sort of traditional old school approach to leadership development, which was very prevalent when I started 20 years ago, where we really just think about leadership and work and career, doesn't work, particularly for women. We flourish when we look at everything. And so what I mean by everything is not only the professional but also the personal, but not just that. It's also things like what's happening physically and physiologically for me. What do I believe in? What do I stand for? What are my values and my principles? What gives me a sense of purpose? What gets me out of bed in the morning? So we're really looking at what does a successful, happy life look and feel like for me? And how does my leadership practice sit within that? Because I'll give you a very small example. How we're feeling on a Sunday night tells us a lot of information about how our leadership practice or our careers or our work life is going. Are we full of excitement? Are we overwhelmed? Are we organized? Are we stressed? And actually, those little, I call them red or green flags that kind of show up each and every day at lots of different points during the day, give us information. And as you know, as we all know as coaches, coaching, leadership coaching is all about awareness and choice. So the more aware I am of all of these different things about who I am, what matters to me, how I'm operating, the more I can make those clear and conscious choices that will enable me to be the best person, human, leader, community member, family member that I can be.
I really love that. And I really, what I particularly resonate with is this idea of looking beyond the workplace and thinking about the kind of holistic identity.
Mm,
And I suppose I'm really kind of curious, like, how open are people to that? Because I can imagine some people are really open to really looking at the full picture and integrating it. And for others, that might feel a bit more uncomfortable, particularly if there's some hard truths to be looking at here, right? Because
mm.
I know for some people that separation is sometimes what keeps things in going and balanced. I'm going to use inverted commas here.
Yes. So I think, oh, there's a couple of things to pick up on there. One of the things that I observe, having run lots of leadership programs over the years, all gender programs and female leaders programs, is that this conversation goes much more quickly in all women groups. Takes about 5 minutes. If we have a group of women and you start to ask those big questions, like, for example, a question which I very often ask at the beginning of a leadership program: what does success look like for you? Which seems like a very simple question, but actually, particularly as women, we have lots and lots and lots of measures of success offered to us. And it ranges from being well paid, being successful, being assertive, being kind, being open, being warm, being organized, being slim, being pretty, being well dressed, having tidy houses, and it goes on and on and on. And actually, it can be very broad. And what women find incredibly empowering and liberating in these conversations is to understand, oh, it's not just me that feels like I've got to tick all these boxes. And actually, this is impossible. I can't possibly live up to the standard of all of these different measures of success. So, what can I do in my thinking to decide actually what matters to me? What are my individual measures of success based on my values and my life? And actually narrowing that down and maybe bringing ourselves away from perfectionism. Good enough is good enough. And, actually letting go of some stuff. And that conversation often takes us really seamlessly into the whole person. Because once you start to ask that kind of big question, it inevitably you're looking quite personally at your whole life. And so I think, for me, my answer to you is that it happens very quickly, very often, particularly in those all-female environments. And you talked about sort of a cutoff and a balance. I think that's part of it. So actually, for me, that's integrated into the conversation, because actually we don't want to be feeling like we're on duty, if you like, or all the time. And so actually that question around where are my boundaries and where do I say no and where do I stop doing stuff is as important as what do I want to do and what actions do I want to take. And what are the mechanisms I need and the processes I need to be really flourishing. And sometimes that's clear boundaries, and sometimes that's letting go, and sometimes that's saying no in order to make a space for something else.
Wow, there's just so much there. And I'm nodding vigorously because, this is also very something, I've experienced in my life. And I suppose every woman does around, the conflicts and the challenges. And one of the most powerful things I heard you say, though, is it's not just me. And that I
Mm.
find that really fascinating that sometimes we're not opening up to the conversations. And I can imagine that you're creating and facilitating that space, which allows women to kind of almost be relieved, to kind of go, it wasn't just me who's experiencing this is as an issue. I mean, do you see that also in the groups that you work with?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I would say 95% of the women that I work with, that's one of the first light bulb moments in those group programs is, oh, I thought this was just me. And actually, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as women, we tend to feel that we're pretty good at talking openly and honestly with each other. And I think generally, I think we do. but actually going to that deeper level of kind of pressure, perfectionism, those measures actually can create a conversation which a lot of women haven't had before. Yeah, and it's just really liberating and really fun, and there's a lot of laughter
I can
and a lot of
imagine.
giggles and a lot of kind of oh my goodness, oh my goodness, a lot of energy in the room. Yeah, they're great conversations, great conversations.
I can imagine. And I love the idea as well that it's about a personal definition of success, because I think also it's really fascinating. I can sort of also see it in some of the conversations I'm having. There is a sense of, well, this is what success must mean, which is often very status hierarchy driven. It's often to do with things like pay grade, um, how others see you and view you. And I find that really fascinating as well, this idea of making your own version of success, right?
Yes, because I also think this is particularly useful for women because we are given so many contradictory messages. So, if we think back to the Chancellor of the Exchequer crying in public, and that the fact that that was such a big deal. There was also something on LinkedIn recently about a senior woman who had had the audacity to turn up to a job interview without makeup on. Or, the women who I speak to, there was a woman I spoke to the other day in a coaching session. Within the same day, she had been told she was too soft and too assertive. Within the same day, both by male peers. So, we're constantly sort of told be this, be this, be this. And so actually, we have to just go inside and decide for ourselves because we can't please everybody all the time.
Yes, very, very wise words. And you touched on boundaries earlier. And I think
Mm,
this is also quite important because I think there's probably for me a distinction between knowing what your boundaries are and what you ideally want to put in place, but then communicating them. And
mm,
so I'm just wondering, like that differentiation, like when people come to actually expressing what their boundaries are and asserting what their needs are, do you have
mm,
any particular strategies or ways of approaching that? Because I think that, you can have your ideas of what you want and need, but actually being able to then get hold of that or be able to get the
mm,
support behind that, whether that's in family context or in the professional work life, that
mm.
can be the challenge sometimes, I find.
Definitely. And Victoria, I'm very often coaching women who are extremely successful and have got to a certain point in their career because they have overworked, been really driven, and said yes to everything. And, those are those amazing problem solvers who are just that gem in the team. And so they come to me at a point where they've just been promoted or they're about to be promoted, and actually they can't do that anymore. That's not going to be the recipe for success in the future. That expression, what got me here won't get me there. That's not how they're going to excel as leaders. They're going to have to start saying no and delegating and creating space for strategic thinking and operating really, really differently. And that can be quite challenging for as when we decide to change the way we operate, we disappoint people around us who expect us to be a certain way. And this is a conversation I have quite a lot. One of the things that I think is magic in this kind of shift is the idea of contracting. So if I say to you, hey, Victoria, now that I'm in the new role, I've been having some great coaching and I've been really thinking about how I work. And what you'll notice in the future is that you'll hear me say no to more things and I will be delegating those to my team. I'll be setting more clear boundaries. And then in a week's time, when you come to me and you say, Sarah, can you do this piece of work for me? And I say, actually, this is one of the things that I'm going to be delegating. You stay in reward response because you are expecting me to say that. It's not new, it's not a shock. But if I don't do the contracting piece and I say no to you, you're going to go into threat response. and your cortisol and adrenaline levels will go up, and you're less likely to be calm in your response to me, and you'll feel maybe a bit criticized or threatened or disappointed or cross. And then it'll be an awkward conversation. So the more we can recontract with all of our stakeholders when we know we're going to make a change, the more likely we are to be able to say no and it be a lovely, calm, fruitful conversation.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? Creating those foundations and then setting up for success, right? So I really like that idea. And it's kind of takes away the surprise element, but also I think also from the other side, the anticipation of making the ask, making that what might feel demanding of other demands of other people to change the way that they are being. But actually, if we've kind of put those foundations in place, I really like that idea. Then
Mm.
there are no surprises. It
Mm.
takes the high stakes out of the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned assertiveness as well. You touched on that. And I'm really kind of interested in this idea because interestingly, it's a question that's come up a few times
Okay.
recently. Actually, interesting, both from men and women who are in my world. And it was that question of, when is it confident and assertive and when is it arrogant and being too domineering? And I just wondered whether you had any perspectives on that you could share with the listeners.
I mean, this is such a big question, and one that, I've been having this conversation for 20 years. And I think one of the differentiators is the bias of the person we're interacting with. So, I don't think there is a formula. This is assertive, this is aggressive. I think often it's to do with bias. So if there's somebody who I'm interacting with and they would expect me or somebody like me to behave in a certain way, when I break the mold of their expectations, again, back to threat response, they will potentially have a threat response and they'll feel uncomfortable. And so they might then interpret my behavior as aggressive. When somebody else who sees me quite differently, I might do the same thing and they might see it as assertive. I think that one of the things that really, really helps around communication style is almost back to the contracting piece, which is as much as we possibly can having conversations with those key stakeholders in our lives. They might be personal or professional or more senior or peers or those that we lead, and say, hey, if we have a disagreement or if I need to set a boundary, how should I do that with you? What works well
Mm.
for you? Because we're all so unique in the way that we operate, in the way that we see the world, in our preferences. You know, I have people that I'm an insights discovery accredited practitioner, and that really digs deep into all these lovely different habits and preferences we have about how we communicate, but how we're communicated with. And so you might have somebody who, in terms of insights discovery, is a kind of has a lot of red energy, which is extrovert thinking energy, and they might just want you to just tell them really quickly, really directly, and move on. Somebody with a lot of green energy, so introvert feeling energy, they might actually want to be told in private that that's a no. And you might want to spend time. How was your day? How's it going? How are you feeling? Is it okay if I talk to you right now? I have something that I'd like to chat through. Is this a good time? So there might be exactly the same message, but very different ways of doing it, depending on what the other person needs from us and how they see the world and what they
Mm.
like and dislike.
I absolutely agree. And I think also in the work that I do with cultural intelligence, it's recognizing not everybody sees feedback in the same way. They don't all want to receive feedback in the same way. And so that approach has to be nuanced, to their behavioral preferences, their communication style. So I know we're using slightly different sort of models, but I think it's so interesting, isn't it, that actually the fact that one person can be experienced as assertive and confident as well as aggressive by different people within the team. So I think that's really helpful sort of insight on that. So thank you for sharing that, because I know that is a question that comes up. And, moving from that, I'm really kind of curious. I mean, you've obviously seen a lot of evolution in this space in the last 20 years, I am sure. But I'm really curious about what you're seeing coming up next and what you see the sort of future unfolding right now when you look at women and leadership.
Oh, that's a really good question, especially right now with everything that's going on in the States. So, one of the things that I have seen, obviously, is a lot of large organizations closing down their women's networks and their diversity and inclusion funding, and, no longer investing in those kind of projects. So it's been a very, very interesting time and lots of very interesting conversations about that. However, what I'm noticing is the passion is still there. It's just happening in a different way. And for me, I think literally $1 million question is, what do we do about the broken rung, as McKinsey calls it? So if you look at the data, and, I work in the Middle East, I work in Europe, I work in the UK, I work in America, and it's the same everywhere, is that you have 50-50 between the genders, at graduate or intern level. And then you have, in most organizations, not all, but in most organizations, you have 30% or below women. And the question is, well, what happens on the journey? Where are we losing the women? And where we're losing the women is at mid-level. And so those women, I get approached, Victoria. I mean, I must get, I would say almost on a daily basis, someone books into my calendar or emails me, and she's a mid-level woman. She's got a line manager who doesn't know how to support her. She's not being invested in. She's not being sent on leadership programs. She's not being sent on secondment. She's feeling frustrated. She's wondering why her confidence level is dipping. And one of them described it as being Harry Pottered, stuck in a cupboard. And this is made, in my observation from these conversations, generally worse if you've had parental leave at some point, because a lot of organizations don't quite know what to do with you when you come back. Some organizations I work with are amazing and will really develop women and really know how to manage that process, but that's the exception, I would say. And so what happens is those women are approaching me and they are spending their own money, which is substantial, coaching with me because they're not being invested in. So my big question is, how do we help those women? And there are a lot of them. So it's a big question around how do we help as many as possible? Because this isn't the kind of rarefied upper echelons where I work as well, and I absolutely love, where you have 2 or 3 women from an organization and a lot of money is invested in them. We're looking at how do we help these mid-level women at scale find their passion, their purpose, fulfill their potential, become those, promotion ready future senior leaders who are absolutely having a brilliant time, know exactly who they are as leaders, and know what they want their career journey to look like, because they are an incredible resource and organizations are losing them. There's a massive female talent brain drain. And so I think for me, that's my big question about what's next and what's the future and what should we be thinking about. I think it's that, and that's what I'm working on. As you know, Victoria, I've got a program that I'm piloting, which I hope to be accessible and scalable for women to either self-fund or for organizations to invest at scale so that we can help these amazing women and see them rise, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important observation and insight, that loss of, as you say, female brain drain. Like I've seen it when I've been in my own marketing career, and I've seen it in other organizations and with friends and family as well. So I think, the question I've got for you is that, clearly there are going to be people listening to this podcast who are key decision makers in organizations, who are men who want to really support women on their journey, but maybe just don't know where to start, or have started on that journey, but don't feel like it's enough. So, what would you
Mm.
want to say to them?
Oh, yes. Oh, I'd have so much to say to them. So the starting point is go and talk to the women, ask them what they want. So that's the thing that I think goes wrong with male allyship. I think there's lots of wonderful male allies out there, and I think the danger is you don't do anything because you don't know what to do, or you do what you think is the right thing without actually having the conversation with that woman who is about to go on maternity leave, for example. What does good look like for her? Because we're in danger of being a bit paternalistic if we just step in and say, oh well, because one of that woman who called herself being Harry Potted, her line manager believes in her, thinks she's great, but he's Harry Potted her because he's assumed that, well, she's got two kids now, she doesn't want a big job anymore, so I'll give her something nice and easy that's not too visible. And he's not listening to her. She's saying, I'm still just as ambitious as I was before I had two kids. Actually, I'm more ambitious because I've had two breaks that I didn't particularly want to take, but actually it made more financial sense for me to take those breaks than my husband because of the difference between paternity and maternity leave. So I'm raring to go. So open the door for me, help me be visible, give me those opportunities. But what the piece that's missing is that he hasn't sat down with her and said, how can I support you? What do you want? What does good look like for you? So that would be the piece of advice that I would give, whether it's and we have the same conversations for women at a different level when it's to do with things like menopause. Every single person, every single human is unique. So actually, to be inclusive, we have to treat them like they're unique. We have to ask them, what's your lived experience? Where do you want to go? How can I help you get there?
I think it sounds so simple and so obvious, but it's clearly not happening. And I find that really interesting, that there's also this blanket approach of this is how we're going to help all the women,
Mm.
rather than that sort of really individualized approach.
Mm.
So I'm really kind of interested, because you mentioned obviously that you're working across many different regions around the world. Are there nuances or differences that you see in, I suppose, how women are evolving, what they want, what they are united in, and perhaps what's different culturally? Is there anything that you
Mm.
see? Because that might be very helpful for listeners to understand.
Yeah, so the biggest differences that I see are kind of around Europe, so the organizations, I work with a few different organizations in Germany, and I notice there's surprisingly quite a big difference between the UK and Germany in terms of what's expected for women and that kind of idea of allyship. So, and that there's been quite a lot of really interesting conversations that I've had with women in Germany around, okay, so maybe I don't have to go part-time once I've got kids. That's interesting because the kind of cultural norm is that you do. And
Mm.
so there isn't a system in place to be that full-time working parent with an equally involved full-time working parent, and to move up to the upper echelons of the organization. So that's been quite interesting. I ran a program recently and we had just wonderful, very giggly conversations about cultural differences. We had a woman from Finland, we had a woman from Sweden, we had women from the UK, a woman from India, a woman from Egypt, Spain, Portugal, Italy. And, you know, when and what we noticed was actually the ones that really stood out as different were Finland and Sweden. Everywhere else, the patterns were pretty similar. And yeah, those women were kind of aghast at some of the stories that were told, and it wasn't just being Harry Pottered by line managers that women talked about. It was things like female friends, husbands, mother-in-laws, actually were also culture carriers around what's okay and what's the norm and how do I move forward. And there was an amazing piece that somebody shared on LinkedIn, Gracie, who I work with, on LinkedIn the other day about if you put crabs into a bucket, when one of the crabs tries to climb out, the other crabs will pull the crab back down, so they never climb out of the bucket. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a brilliant metaphor. You know, who in your life are the crabs that are pulling you down? And actually, how do you recontract with them? How do you help them? Because these are not people who are trying to hurt you. These are people who are trying to help you generally. They're people who love you and think they're doing the best for you. But it's back to recontracting. If you can have a conversation with those people around, but actually, this is what success looks like for me, and how you might help me is.
That's brilliant. That's very, very insightful. And I think that's really interesting as well about what keeps people and keeps women stuck. What
Mm,
could potentially be others trying to help you, try to keep you safe, actually
mm.
might keep you stuck as well. And I find that really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And just before we went live, you mentioned you have a daughter. I have a daughter who's a bit younger. I'm really kind of curious. What's your greatest wish for your daughter as her life, her career evolves?
Oh, that's brilliant. What a good question. Gosh, I don't think I know the answer. Um, well, I have two daughters actually. So my wish for my daughters is that they feel free to make choices to follow what they're passionate about. I am very, very lucky that I love my job. I I don't get Sunday night dread. I get nervous, you know, if I've got a big keynote talk or I've got, you know, a workshop that really matters to me. I think about it very deeply and I work very hard on it. And like everybody else, I have some days where I'm a bit overwhelmed or I'm a bit tired. But generally, I do something that I absolutely love that brings me energy and that I'm passionate about. And it took me a while to get there. It was what's the expression, squiggly career route, you know? And my hope for my fabulous daughters is that they also find something that gives them financial freedom, enough money to be able to make their own empowered choices, and that brings them joy and that feeds their soul.
Wow. That is a wonderful wish. And thank you for sharing that. I think that is very, very powerful. As we're coming towards the end, I mean, literally, I could speak to you forever, Sarah. I love this conversation. It's been very, very reflective for me. And also as a mother of a daughter, as a woman, but also working with both female and male clients, I find this is a very fascinating conversation
Mm.
and lots to think about. Um, you know, I'm kind of just interested in a final question, which is, you know, what is something that you've learned recently about leadership or communication, something that you've kind of really thought about and reflected and taken something from?
So, yeah, it's a great question. So I spent the weekend in Barcelona at the CERSI conference, which is the European conference for interventional radiologists and vascular surgeons. So I spent the weekend talking to these amazing surgeons. And, you know, I'm sure you have this all the time, Victoria. When you're talking to a client, you hear people say things like, oh, well, it's not life and death. Well, I was working at the weekend with people for whom it actually is. You know, they are making really important decisions in multidisciplinary conversations, but they're also potentially leading a room with a patient on the table and all these different disciplines in the room. And the patient might even be awake for some of these procedures. So they're really, talk about incredible communication skills and powerful influencing skills and powerful decision making skills. And one of the things that came up in our conversations over the weekend again and again was this idea of intention setting. So if you imagine, so back to the fact that I was a professional actor before I was a coach, if you imagine Judi Dench stepping out on stage, she's not going to just walk out on stage. She's going to have warmed up. She's going to have prepared. She's going to have got herself into the zone. And I mean, obviously there'll be rehearsal, but in that 5, 10 minutes, or even 30 seconds before she steps on stage, she's going to prepare. We're not taught to do this in day-to-day life, are we? And so actually, it's magic. Try it out. Before you next step into a conversation, roll your shoulders, take a breath, and think, what's my intention? What's my intention for this conversation? How do I want to show up? What does this person need from me? How will I make this a success? And then step into the room. And I guarantee that conversation, that interaction, that workshop, that meeting will be completely different. So that was, rather than rushing and rushing and rushing from one thing to the next, that idea of the 20-second reset and intention setting, that came up a lot.
That is powerful. I love that. And the idea that it can be done within a matter of seconds to get into that intention of how you want to project yourself, how you want to show up, the energy that you want to bring into the conversation. Absolutely love that. Really, really love that. Sarah, you have been incredibly kind, sharing some amazing insights, very inspiring conversation for me personally, but I know also for our listeners as well. If people want to find out more about you and your work, and do you have anything particular you want to sort of share as a sort of final thoughts for today?
Yes, I mean, anybody that would like to talk to me about women in leadership programs, if you're a mid-level woman out there and you're thinking, oh my God, that's me, get in touch with me via my website, sarahperugia.com. Or if you're somebody thinking, oh, I want to really think about confidence as I speak and influence, I've got masterclasses and I've got one-to-one coaching. So again, just, have a look at my website, book into my calendar. I'm always up for a virtual coffee and a chat. I'm really, really happy to help.
Amazing. And we'll put all your links on the show notes, and so everybody can
Fabulous.
be in touch with you as well. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here today. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. So really appreciate the time that you've made for this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Victoria. I've absolutely loved it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing everyone next time on the show.